With the BC real estate market being so overheated over the past several months, the BC government has finally decided to step in. What was previously being called a cooling off period is now being renamed the home buyer protection period. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you're going to want to stick around to find out. Because I'm going to tell you all about what's been proposed, when it's going to be implemented, what are the pros and cons of what's been proposed, and some of my own suggestions on what they should do better. And it's all coming at you right after this. What's going on, guys? Alex Dunbar here from the Dunbar Real Estate Group and RE/MAX Treeland Realty based out of the Surrey Langley areas. And in this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the home buyer protection period, previously known as the cooling off period. So just keep in mind, I will probably be using both these names interchangeably. So what I'll be covering today is what exactly the home buyer protection period is, what are the pros and cons of some of the proposed changes, and what are my major concerns, how will this cooling off period compare to that of the rescission period for pre-sale and new construction, and what are some of my suggestions around these changes. But before I get into it, I'll ask that you do one thing for me, and that's to hit that like button if you're in support of a more balanced real estate market. And if you're interested in seeing more videos just like this one, I come out with new videos every single week, so you're going to want to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you're notified whenever I come out with a new video. But getting right into it, let's discuss what exactly this home buyer protection period is. So essentially, it's a given period of time for buyers to reconsider their offers and get things done, such as making sure their financing's in order and getting a home inspection. The discussion is around making these things mandatory, as previously there were several buyers in the market that were waiving these conditions. And in doing so, the government believes that this has actually put buyers into worse positions by taking on more risk. So essentially, the whole premise behind it is to protect consumers on the buying end, as well as reduce the amount of buyer's remorse they're having. So if you haven't been keeping up with the real estate market here in BC, and specifically in the Lower Mainland, you know it's been absolutely crazy over the past number of months, and even upwards of the last 18 months. A large majority of the properties sold over this time period have been selling in a multiple offer situation, and most of the time over asking and with no subjects. And due to this, it's made many buyers feel lost and scared of trying to enter into the market, because in a normal market, buyers are able to have these subjects and conditions in their contracts and be able to do their due diligence after they've got an accepted offer. But in order to even have a chance to compete, most buyers feel that they need to waive these conditions, and specifically they're subject to financing. So these proposed changes are going to be put in place in order to make the buying process less stressful and essentially try to prevent buyers from making poor decisions. As per a recent report, the home buyer protection plan is supposed to be implemented sometime in the spring. However, we're not sure of an exact date. But now that you've got a better idea around what the home buyer protection plan is, let's dive into some of the major concerns. So number one, right off the bat, is the fact that buyers are given the right to back out of the deal. However, sellers aren't given the same rights. And what you need to keep in mind is that it takes two parties to form a transaction. So the issue here is that sellers are being forced to accept certain conditions and subjects that they otherwise wouldn't have to. So at the end of the day, we do have to consider the seller's rights as well. Problem number two is that buyers could go out and make multiple offers on multiple different properties. Obviously, in most cases, this poses a problem, as their intention is only to purchase one of those. And this means they'd be able to tie up multiple properties at a time with only having the intention of choosing one. Problem number three is that multiple transactions are typically linked together in one way or another. What I mean by this is most buyers are also sellers. And in order to make that next purchase, they typically are going to need the funds from the sale of their last home. The issue here being is that they don't have the certainty that their sale is actually going to go through, especially if they're out shopping for homes before they've previously sold. And in most cases, multiple transactions are linked together. As I said, the buyer of one property is a seller of another, which also has another buyer who may be a seller of another, and so on and so forth. So essentially, if one transaction goes wrong in this entire set of dominoes, the whole thing could come crashing down, and essentially could lead to many legal issues and lawsuits. Moving on to concern number four, and that's that there isn't a clear time frame for how long this cooling off period will be. By the sounds of it, it may be somewhere in the 5 to 7 day range. However, we still aren't sure. Obviously, one of the concerns with this is people that are tying up properties for extended periods of time is going to do a disservice to the seller if they end up backing out, because the buyer pool that was around 7 days ago may not still be there in another 7 days. And oftentimes when a deal does fall apart, that property can become stigmatized, because the next buyer is always going to wonder why that previous deal didn't go through. Issue number five, and probably the most concerning issue in my point of view, is what the financial penalty will be for buyers who back out of a deal. At this point in time, they haven't yet indicated whether there will will for sure be a penalty or not. However, they have kind of hinted towards it. But at the end of the day, it has to be large enough that it makes sure that the buyer is actually intentional with writing offers. If it's only $1,000 or something of that nature, there's many buyers out there who won't even blink an eye. Because at the end of the day, if it costs them a couple $1,000s to save tens of thousands of dollars on a deal, they're going to be willing to do that, especially those buyers with deeper pockets. Concern number 6 is whether or not a buyer will be able to waive this period. So at this point in time, it's still uncertain. It sounds like they probably will be able to, but again, we're not sure. Because if buyers are able to waive this period, what really changes? That's essentially the same as a subject-free offer. And my 7th and final concern is that implementing these changes won't actually help with housing affordability. And personally, I actually think it might do a little bit of the opposite. One of the reasons being is that if you're in a multiple offer situation, let's just say you have 7 different offers and one of those offers is subject free, a seller's more likely to take that offer even if it's at a lower price than the top offer that has several subjects in it. Again, this comes down to certainty and the situation, but if a seller has another property lined up they want to buy, they want to make sure they're able to do so. And by being given that certainty, sometimes the buyer can actually get the house at what we'll call a bit of a discount. But now if these changes are implemented, the focus will almost solely be on the price. Of course, there's other things such as the dates and the size of the deposit, but it's primarily going to revolve around price. Moving on, I want to discuss how these new changes will compare to the rescission period of pre-sale properties. So if you weren't aware, with pre-sale and new construction properties here in BC, you actually are given a 7-day right of rescission period. And put in simple terms, this means over that 7-day period, after you've got your accepted offer, you can walk away for whatever reason you want. It's put in place in order to allow the buyer to do their due diligence, but as I said, you don't need any specific reason as to why you want to back out of the deal. However, we need to consider the differences between a resale property and a pre-sale property and who's selling them. So the biggest thing to keep in mind is that a developer is selling off the pre-sale units, and typically they're not going to have as tight of a time constraint. Additionally, they're typically going to have much deeper pockets. So this is important because the timeliness of a pre-sale is nowhere near as important as a resale. With a pre-sale property, if a buyer does rescind their contract, the developer can then just go remarket the property and resell it probably in the next week or month. When we're talking about resale properties, they're typically on a much tighter timeline as they need to be able to sell their property in order to get into the next one. Whereas a developer may have a new project on the horizon that they're planning to move on to, however, it's not going to leave them homeless if they don't sell it right away. Additionally, pre-sale contracts are typically much longer and more complex than a resale contract. So a lot of the time, it does make more sense to give them that 7-day period in order to review those documents. Whereas with a resale property, you can typically get a lot of that legwork done up front, especially if there is an offer presentation date at a later date. And lastly, a buyer's typically purchasing a pre-sale property from a development corporation. So clearly you can see there's an imbalance of power here. Whereas in the resale market, the buyer and the seller are typically equal players in the transaction. So clearly, even though there are some similarities between pre-sale and resale, there's enough differences that it actually makes sense to have the rescission period there, but potentially not with resale. And now let's move on to some of my personal suggestions on how they could combat this issue. So first of all, I want to start off by saying that the BC Real Estate Association, also known as the BCREA, believes that this is actually going to cause more problems than it's going to solve. And one of the main ones being increased uncertainty for sellers. So one of their major suggestions, which I'm aligned with, is to actually have a pre-offer period instead of a cooling off period. So instead of allowing buyers to write an offer and then back out afterwards, it would require that properties were listed at least 5 days prior to looking at offers. By doing so, this would provide equal opportunity for all buyers in order to view the property and do any sort of due diligence or home inspection that they wanted to. Additionally, I think another solution they could potentially implement is requiring mandatory pre-listing inspection. Or, kind of touching on my last point, at least giving people the option to have an inspection if they want to. One concern I could see being an issue here is the regulation of those home inspections and who gets to choose who the inspector is. Because obviously, if the seller is the one hiring the home inspector, the buyer might not be in agreement with who they chose to hire. So this suggestion is a little bit complex, however, I think there are some ways that we could implement it. It just needs to be further discussed. My next suggestion is to make sure that the financial penalty for backing out of a deal is large enough to make sure that buyers coming in actually have the intention of purchasing. My thoughts are that maybe it could be something like 0.5% of the purchase price, but this is up for debate. I'm not really a huge fan of having one flat fee regardless of the property type or the price, because this does doesn't seem fair to those shopping at the lower end versus the higher end. Another suggestion / potential tip I have is for buyers to offer the seller a non-refundable deposit. By doing so, this is going to show their commitment to the seller and give them a leg up against their competition. And lastly, one of the most important rules I think they need to implement in one way or another is the fact that a buyer who is under contract can't negotiate the price without actually having some sort of reasoning to do so. What I mean by this is I can see buyers going out and tying up properties and then later trying to negotiate the price down. Now, if they were to find something alarming in the documents or through the home inspection, completely fair. But if they were initially just trying to tie up the property so they could haggle with the seller, I'm not a fan of this. And how they would regulate this is difficult to say, but that is what I think they need to do. And that's about going to do it for my video today, but I want to finish off by readdressing some of the main concerns. Number one is how much the financial penalty is going to be on buyers if they choose to back out of a deal, as well as what other sorts of restrictions, if any, will be implemented on buyers, such as not allowing them to make offers on multiple properties at one time. Additionally, the fact that this cooling off period more than likely isn't going to have any sort of impact on reducing prices. I am happy that the government has chosen to rename it, as cooling off kind of gave the public the wrong idea, but I'm sure there will still be people out there that believe this was implemented in order to make housing more affordable. And the real issue here is that the government is reactive with their policy. What I mean by this is they wait far too long until a problem has occurred until they actually try to implement something. And typically, by the time they actually get around to doing anything, the market has already corrected itself. But from an outside perspective, it looks like what the government implemented actually made the change. And obviously, the government will try to take credit for this. So if you're not aware, the local market has already started to shift and things have started to cool down. This is due to a variety of factors, primarily being the increase in the level of inventory and the start of the increase in interest rates. So what you have to keep in mind with the new policies that are going to be implemented is that they're there to protect the consumer, and they're not actually being put in place in order to create greater housing affordability. And additionally, they're just trying to reduce the level of buyer's remorse. As for other changes the government has proposed to implement in order to make the market more comfortable for buyers are things such as mandatory inspections and banning blind bidding. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what the effects of banning blind bidding could have, I've previously made a video on this and you can see that right up here. And that's about going to wrap up my video for today, but if you did get any value from this whatsoever, I'll ask that you do one thing for me, and that's to smash that like button. And if you're interested in seeing more real estate videos just like this one, I suggest you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you're notified whenever I put out a new video. Additionally, if you're looking to buy or sell in Surrey, Langley, or the rest of the Fraser Valley, I'd be more than happy to help. You can scroll down and hit the first link in the bio to book a call with me at your own convenience. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.